case that I only recently learned about, and that is of the Starbucks coffee murders. Before we jump into that, I just have a couple of housekeeping items, one more than usual, and I am just gonna get through those quickly so we can dive into this case together. So, first housekeeping item. If you watched one of my previous videos where I talked about making a second channel for ASMR content that was not true crime related, I posted a poll with different channel name ideas, and I think close to 300 people voted, which I am so appreciative of. But I wanted to share that one of the names I just cannot get out of my head, but that channel name was actually one of the least voted for, and that one is Opal Soul ASMR. And I wanted to have a channel name that almost mirrored Neon Moon, and Opal Soul may not necessarily sound like it's a mirror name of Neon Moon, but in my head it is, because opal, the gemstone, is very colorful and fiery. It has many different colors in it, and it catches the light in a really beautiful way. Opal is also my birthstone, and the second part of it is soul, which is S-O-L, which means sun, which is, of course, the opposite of the moon. So, but then soul is a play on words for, like, your own soul. So, I don't know, Opal Soul is really just pressing on my heart. So, I may go that route, but I still have not decided. And then my other two housekeeping is that, as always, I will post a pinned comment down below with 3 cases that I am interested in covering, and I would like you to comment down below, please, with your vote, so I know which one has the most interest in being covered. And then finally, if you are not already subscribed, I would be so grateful and honored for you to subscribe to the channel. So please do so if you feel so inclined. So that will conclude our housekeeping, and let's jump right into this Starbucks murder. So, I am sure most people listening to this are aware of what Starbucks is. I am sure that you have been inside of one. You have had the coffee, something. Starbucks has most certainly dominated the coffee industry, and there are certainly at least 10 locations where I live, so they're everywhere. And whether or not you're a Starbucks drinker or not, I imagine that we can all agree that Starbucks or not, any coffee shop is meant to bring about a certain ambiance of comfort, relaxation. Things are slowed down there if you're spending time there. You're meeting up with a friend, you are reading a book, studying. More or less, it's not the place you anticipate there to be a crime, especially a triple homicide. But on July 7th of 1997, that would not be the case. So let's get into this story. The day shift manager would arrive to open the Starbucks coffee shop at 1810 Wisconsin Avenue on the border of the upscale Georgetown neighborhood of Washington, D.C. at 5:15 in the morning. And this was already starting to be a hot Monday morning because it was the middle of the summer. The long 4th of July weekend, which is always quite hectic for the Washington, D.C. area, was over and things in general were starting to quiet down. But nevertheless, the coffee shop would be busy soon with commuters returning to work, and so this day shift manager had to hurry and get things started for the day. This manager would notice a lone car with a flat tire in the parking lot, which seemed strange. It resembled the one that the night shift supervisor drove, and she thought maybe that when the night shift supervisor came out, she noticed that she had a flat tire and left her car there, so someone was able to drive her home. And this Georgetown area was quite safe, so leaving your car overnight would not be a problem. And so that's kind of like the last of what the morning day shift manager thought of the situation. But when this morning manager opened the shop and entered, she would immediately see that the place was littered with trash. She would walk through the eating area, and it seemed that something more was wrong than just like the night shift's simple neglect of cleaning up trash from the day. The store music was still playing, and so it was kind of alarming that both the trash from customers that day had not been taken care of, and nobody turned the music off. It was very out of character for Mary, the night shift manager, to leave without ensuring that everything was as it should be. She was described as conscientious to a fault, so something really started to worry this day shift manager because it had never been left like this before. It was said that just the feeling in the air felt wrong that morning. A stray cup on the floor, a broom leaning against the counter, the garbage not being taken out as if they had been in the process of cleaning things up, but it just suddenly stopped. This manager would continue to look around, uncertain of what to make of the state of the coffee shop, and then would enter the back room to open the office. When she did this, she would come across a female form in a Starbucks uniform lying on the floor, and it was quickly determined that that was Mary Mahoney, the night shift manager, and she was laying on the floor disturbingly still. Around her was a dark liquid substance that looked like blood. And just beyond her, someone else was on the floor. And now it seemed clear that these two employees had been killed. So as soon as she realizes that two of their employees are dead on the floor, she immediately runs outside of the store onto the sidewalk and flagged down a bus driver to ask for help because she did not want to stay inside the Starbucks to call 911, unsure if anyone else was still in there or if there was any danger present, which was quite smart of her. And so the bus driver was able to alert dispatchers at 911 to send the police, and they responded immediately. A team of officers arrived to protect and examine the scene. Taping the entrance, they kept customers out, but as you can imagine, this started to draw a very curious crowd. Officers found the bodies of not two, but three uniformed employees on the floor in the back room, one of them lying partially over another. All had been shot execution style, and their blood had pooled onto the floor around them. A detective checked with the morning manager who had first found the two bodies, and she said that when she had arrived, the doors were locked. Yet there had been no forced entry, and the keys were still with the night supervisor. Since closing time was 8 o'clock on Sundays, it seemed as though that the perpetrator had arrived before the doors were locked, and the condition of the bodies would indicate that a time of death was somewhere around the time of 8 o'clock. A crime scene processing unit arrived to take photographs, lift fingerprints, look for other types of evidence, and map the scene. They would pick up 10 bullet casings, some from a .38 revolver, and others are from a semi-automatic handgun. So they would initially surmise that two shooters had been involved because there were two separate guns. Detectives would fan out to canvass the neighborhood for witnesses and leads. They found somebody who had tried the door between 9 to 9:30 that night because they had noticed that all the lights were still on and thought maybe this particular Starbucks was staying open late that night. Since the doors were locked when the day shift supervisor came in, it seemed possible that the killers were still there between the 9 to 9:30 p.m. time that this witness had tried accessing the buildings. However, the gun ammunition casings that were left behind at the scene indicated a hurried or careless exit. The two other victims were both male. One was 25-year-old Emery Allen Evans, and the second was 18-year-old Aaron David Goodrich. Aaron had only worked there a few months and had been a last-minute addition to the Sunday evening shift. And then Emery had only been employed there not even 1 month. So, from the detective's point of view, the assumption was that the deaths had occurred in the midst of a robbery. Now, the Georgetown area was considered a safe area, but there had been a spree of armed robberies in this area the year before. The day shift manager would help detectives examine the cash register and the office safe, both of which were found to be closed and undisturbed. Because of the holiday weekend, no one had taken a deposit to the bank in 3 days, so the safe contained over $10,000. Yet, the robbers had taken nothing. And according to police, they speculated that perhaps they had lost control of the scene and inadvertently shot someone, then killed the others to eliminate witnesses. And possibly violence had never been part of the plan, so they fled quickly in case someone had heard the gunshots. Starbucks officials announced that security guards would be posted at other nearby stores for an indefinite period of time. The Starbucks CEO at the time flew into Washington, D.C. to assist, offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. At this time in 1997, Starbucks had more than 1,200 locations, including 62 stores in the Washington, D.C. area alone, and this was the first kind of crime of that nature that had ever transpired at a Starbucks. And in general, there are parts of Washington, D.C. that have a reputation for crime, but again, the Georgetown area was not one of those areas. It was definitely more affluent, and so this incident even shocked city officials. A district council member by the name of Jack Ward was quoted saying, "To have a triple homicide anywhere in the District of Columbia is an unusual event. To have a triple homicide in Georgetown is extraordinary." And so, as you can imagine, for everyone's sake, they had hoped to make a swift arrest. Residents of this neighborhood left wreaths, candles, plants, and poetry at the store's entrance to create a visible memorial. In the absence of police briefings, reporters collected information about the victims to put faces on them for readers and to give dimension to their lives. Mary, who also went by Katie, who was the night shift supervisor, had practiced being bold all her life because she did not want to live afraid. Her grandmother had recently bought her the 1994 Saturn, which was the vehicle left in the parking lot, and her grandmother did this so she could get around in the city and feel safer. Mary, or Katie, it sounds like she actually went by Katie more, habitually jogged alone at night, convinced that she would never be attacked. And she had once even traveled as an exchange student to the Soviet Union and was a White House intern under President Clinton. Her mother would say that she had an enormous heart and that she would probably have compassion for the person who killed her. Katie, who had a special love for animals, had been just shy of her 26th birthday. She had been employed with Starbucks for 2 years and had taken special pride in being a store manager. Emery Evans had worked part-time and was trying to save enough money to attend Howard University, where he had hoped to major in music. He played the French horn and was an only child, so he had a reputation for always trying to do the right thing, and he enjoyed time with his family back in New Jersey. Aaron Goodrich was a fun-loving high school senior who had so much of life left ahead of him. He lived with his father, and his father was the one who helped him get the job at Starbucks. Aaron was the store's youngest employee, and because of this, he had earned the nickname Baby by his coworkers. Now, police would come across surveillance footage, and a frame in particular showed that Katie had attempted to escape, but the footage would not actually show the shooters. The post-mortem examination indicated that she was shot 5 times, taking 4 shots to the head, while Emery Evans was shot once in the chest and twice in the head. Aaron Goodrich had been shot only once. So when they started looking at the number of bullets that each person took, investigators started to wonder if maybe Katie had been the intended target, because such overkill of shooting with 4 of 5 shots going directly into her head execution style was often a symptom of anger. Investigators would interview current employees, asking about any former employees that may have had some kind of vendetta against Katie, and one lead emerged right away. Katie had recently fired a male employee on suspicion of theft when several $100 turned up missing from the safe. The police would obtain his name and address and went to check him out. He would answer all of the police questions and claimed that he had not been involved in this, and the police were not able to find any evidence linking this man to the triple homicide. And unfortunately, there would be no quick or easy route to an arrest. It turned out there were no usable fingerprints inside of the Starbucks aside from those shell casings, there was literally no physical evidence. A bullet hole found over the safe suggested that a warning shot had been fired, possibly to get an employee to open it, but the safe had not been open. Only Katie had the combination, so detectives surmised that she might have defied the robber's orders and had been killed as a result. No one from the area had reported seeing anyone enter the store at closing time or leaving later. FBI profilers were consulted at the time, and they said that these killers would likely have prior offenses on their records, and so they suggested looking at other armed robberies, but unfortunately that effort turned up no clear leads to the Starbucks shooting. The Georgetown Business Association offered a $10,000 reward for information, and Starbucks would also pay for the victims' funerals and for counseling for the family members, which I thought was incredibly lovely of them to do. The homicide unit supervisor, Lieutenant Brian McAllister, insisted that with methodical police work, the case would ultimately be closed. But that meant that it was going to take time. In fact, there was little news for several months, despite the concerns of residents and the family's need for closure. While investigators kept working, as each day passed, it seemed that the case was growing colder, and in a busy area like Washington, D.C., that it might eventually be shelved as low priority. But then something occurred that brought attention back to this case. In the fall of 1997, a woman named Linda Tripp began taping her conversations with Monica Lewinsky, a former White House intern for President Bill Clinton. The subject was a long-term affair that Lewinsky claimed to have had with the president. Linda Tripp then played the tapes for members of the staff of Newsweek, but the magazine declined at the time to publish what appeared to be a potentially explosive story. In the meantime, Monica Lewinsky, who was 25, had left the internship and was looking for a job in New York City. In December, she was subpoenaed for a sexual harassment lawsuit against Bill Clinton, which was brought on by Paula Jones, a former Arkansas state employee. At first, it appeared that the situation would remain moderately low-key, but initial appearances were wrong. On January 7th of 1998, Monica Lewinsky signed an affidavit denying that she had ever had sexual relations with President Clinton. However, Linda Tripp had Monica Lewinsky's admission on tape, and she gave it to her own attorney. Linda then contacted the Office of Independent Counsel Ken Starr, who was allegedly investigating the Clinton family on other matters. She discussed the tapes with him, along with allegations that Bill Clinton had urged Monica Lewinsky to lie under oath. This situation grew more complex as Monica Lewinsky obtained legal representation and obtained an immunity agreement both for herself and her parents. She then admitted that she had had an affair with the president, and she had in fact visited the White House 37 times since leaving her position as an intern. And the president's secretary, Betty Curie, admitted to a grand jury that Monica Lewinsky and the president had been alone on several occasions, which many other people would also confirm. So at this point, Bill Clinton was on the hot seat, with yet another woman emerging to make a claim about sexual impropriety, and he was required to answer some very tough questions. His worst alleged offense, it seemed, was exploiting his authority with Monica Lewinsky and then instigating a cover-up. Bill Clinton admitted he had been alone with Monica Lewinsky a few times and had given her some gifts, but denied anything overt. However, a certain blue dress came to light. Monica Lewinsky had worn this dress while she was with President Clinton and saved it. She would claim that it had a semen stain that would corroborate her story. The FBI performed a DNA analysis and confirmed that this stain had in fact originated with Bill Clinton. 7 months after his adamant denial, Clinton finally admitted to inappropriate encounters with her that involved sexual contact. Many people would call for President Bill Clinton's resignation, but Monica Lewinsky would not say that he had coached her to lie under oath, so Bill Clinton rode out the storm and remained president. So you're probably wondering, why am I talking about President Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky in the middle of a Starbucks Triple Homicide? Well, if you remember, earlier I briefly said that Katie Mahoney had been a White House intern. So, let's talk about it. Although nothing concrete ever linked the Monica Lewinsky scandal to Katie Mahoney and the Starbucks shooting, Katie's prior participation in the White House intern program generated renewed interest in the crime, and additional reports about it in the newspapers generated more calls to the police tip line. One of them stood out. Caller 234 implicated a man by the name of Carl who lived on Gallatin Street. He was short, brown-skinned, in his mid-20s with a beard. He drove a small car and carried 2 or 3 guns. He was described as vicious and had killed prior to the Starbucks incident, and he had even murdered one of his partners. Now, this was only a crumb of information, but detectives immediately went to work. Through the Department of Motor Vehicles, they had figured out that Carl was probably Carl Cooper that lived on Gallatin Street, who drove a Honda Civic and had 7 arrests on his record. However, prior investigations were littered with accusations of his incompetence, which only made things worse. In September of 1997, the police were criticized for failing to seize a pair of white athletic shoes from the first suspect, the former Starbucks employee who had been fired, to compare to evidence from the scene. Apparently, just a day after they had investigated him, an evidence technician mentioned that he thought he had seen a dark stain on the shoes, and a black and white photo affirmed it. The shoes were then seized and analyzed, but the police announced there had been no evidence on them linked to the murders. However, at this time, the public maintained its distrust. The Washington homicide units were under absolute scrutiny because so many of their cases, more than 60% at the time, actually remained unsolved. District Police Chief Larry D. Salisbury replaced all of the supervisors and began searching outside the city for a new unit commander. And by this time, Starbucks had also increased its reward to $100,000. So, throughout this time, the Starbucks coffee shop location where the homicides transpired remained closed. People who walked by were reminded of what had occurred there. But finally, Starbucks decided to reopen the shop, announcing a reopening date of February 21st of 1998. To honor the victims, they built a floor-to-ceiling maplewood mural that held 3 boxes, each engraved with the initials of one of the victims. Their surviving relatives placed mementos into the boxes, and the company announced it would donate all net profits from this store to the Community Foundation for the National Capital Region, which was an organization dedicated to non-violence. Starbucks also donated money to Circle of Hope, a group that guided teens toward being productive members of society. So I have to give Starbucks credit. Just as a side note, I am very impressed with the way they stepped up in support of the slain employees and their family members. It was absolutely the right thing to do, and it would have been, I think, a political nightmare if they hadn't, given the amount of money that Starbucks has. Soon enough, the store was bustling with activity again. By the time a year had passed, as local newspapers marked the tragic anniversary of the homicides, the case had grown cold. Public officials said little about it, as they knew how difficult it would be to catch the killer at this point. Yet, 2 homicide detectives and an FBI agent were still assigned to this case full-time. To date, at the time, they had interviewed hundreds of people and followed dozens of leads. One officer told reporters that the police were optimistic about solving it because they had some tips that looked good. They just had to work up more evidence to make an arrest stick. Some people thought that kind of talk was just for public relationships, but the police knew what they had. Some cases, as you probably know, take longer than others, and this one, although slow, did in fact have a solid suspect. Fortunately, a television program about fugitives and unsolved crimes called America's Most Wanted has been a valuable tool in cold case investigations. Thanks to tips from viewers, the program has solved cases more than a decade old and assisted in the arrest of over 500 fugitives. The Starbucks shooting case was developed into an episode for the show, and it aired, and then the program repeated the episode in June of 1998. And the second time around, it paid off. A viewer of the show called to say that she had dated a man who knew another man named Carl Cooper, and according to conversations that transpired between these individuals, Cooper had claimed to be the Starbucks killer. This was the kind of break the case needed, since Carl Cooper was already on the list of suspects. This woman agreed to wear a wire to get corroboration of what Cooper said. The Prince George County Police in Maryland were actually already investigating Cooper in the context of another shooting the year before, which was a attempted murder of a cop named Bruce Howard with the Metropolitan Police Department. And so this guy was clearly on a handful of people's radar. And the police department thought that this information that this woman brought forward was solid. So the two jurisdictions pulled together, and with the help of the FBI, they would build a case. Among the things they did was to wiretap Cooper's phone and to mount a surveillance camera on a utility pole outside his home. From this, they were able to generate numbers and leads about other people who might have been involved. They also obtained a gun from Cooper's wife that had been used in another fatal shooting. The case would grow complicated because Cooper had a large network of criminal associates, but his style of killing, it seemed, matched that of the homicides at the Starbucks location. So finally, the police would settle on Cooper being their primary suspect and decided to bring him in. On March 3rd of 1999, the newspapers would announce that a suspect was being questioned in connection with the crimes, and that was Carl Derek Cooper, who was 29 years old. A witness referred to in an affidavit published by the Washington Post told police that Cooper had invited him to participate in a robbery of the Georgetown Starbucks. He said that Cooper had already determined that it was a good target, but then never followed up with this person to do the job. So apparently he had gone ahead to take care of this robbery on his own. Cooper had a long criminal record in several jurisdictions, including armed robbery, a string of car thefts, and drug charges. What linked the Starbucks and the Prince George's County incident was that two handguns of different calibers were used in both, and that a decade before, when Cooper had been arrested for another offense, he had ammunition on him from two different caliber handguns. Sound familiar? The police also had an informant who said that Cooper had admitted to him that he had committed the 1997 shooting and knew things that only the perpetrator would know. According to local accounts, Cooper had lived in the northeastern part of Washington, D.C. his entire life and resided there with his mother, wife, and their 4-year-old son. His deceased father had been a church deacon, and people in the area viewed Cooper as a nice man. His first run-in with the law had been over a cocaine possession, and then he ultimately would evolve into armed robbery. At first, Cooper would deny the Starbucks shooting, but after he was transferred from one jurisdiction to another and was caught in several lies, he decided to start talking. What he said at first was misleading, but then he got down to business. Despite detectives often cautioning him, Cooper waived his right to an attorney and to remain silent and began implicating two other men. One of them, whom Cooper named as the shooter, had even lived in the same buildings as Emery Evans and had known him, so this person was picked up. 8 different FBI agents would question him for 15 hours. This man would take and passed a polygraph test, but was then arrested as a felon in possession of a firearm, a charge that would later be dismissed. He would later tell reporters he thought Satan was trying to step on him and frame him just as he was getting his life together, and he would refer to the Starbucks shootings as evil. But then Cooper would finally take credit for the shooting himself. An affidavit unsealed in a Washington, D.C. Superior Court described the following scenario. For a month, he had planned to rob the Starbucks location. He had even approached another man to do it with him. The Sunday following the 4th of July weekend, he knew meant the safe would probably contain an abundance of receipts from at least 3 days. It was a busy shop, so it should be a lucrative take. He couldn't find his chosen partner that afternoon, so he decided to do it alone. He did not want to miss his window of opportunity. He went to the shop that morning after dropping his mother off at her church to see if business was steady, which it was. He could see no surveillance camera, and this confirmed his decision to hit this location. During the evening, around the time he knew the place would be closed, he drove to the rear of the store and parked. He had 2 handguns with him. He liked one for power and the other for accuracy. He then entered the store and announced his intent to rob the shop. There were 3 employees present, he recalled, 2 males and a female, and he herded them into the back room. At his request, the woman identified herself as the supervisor, and he ordered her to open the safe. She refused, so he fired a warning shot to show her that he meant business, and this bullet would hit the ceiling. She then ran, and he pursued her, wrestling with her to get the keys to the safe. She made it as far as the sidewalk outside before he caught her and dragged her back in, but at this time there were no witnesses on the streets. She tried to grab one of his guns, he claimed, so he shot her. He was quoted saying, "I kept telling her to give me the keys, but she kept fighting me." Then he would use both guns on her. He was also then quoted saying, "Everything else was like a dream. I just started shooting." She had not been targeted with a personal vendetta, but simply drew fire because she had resisted. Then at this point, Cooper would turn his attention to the 2 frightened young men. He walked into the back room just as one of them began to run, so he shot them both. He shot the black male 3 times, he remembered, because his first shot directly to the chest failed to kill the young man. That contact wound was consistent with a sub-nose 38. So, to end his suffering, Cooper said he shot him twice in the head. He shot the white male only once. Then he left without even trying to get into the cash register or safe. Having just committed a triple homicide, he went directly home, got rid of his guns, and he washed his clothes. He buried the guns inside a plastic bag on the grounds of St. Anne's Infant Home in Hyattsville, which was a few blocks from where he lived. So at this point, Cooper was placed under arrest, given a court-appointed attorney, Stephen Kirsch, and was asked for hair and blood and blood samples for analysis. He claimed that he'd have told police about his involvement a year earlier if city detectives had not harassed his family. On March 6th of 1999, newspapers announced that Cooper had been arrested as the lone gunman in the Starbucks shooting. After several hearings, Cooper was charged on August 5th of 1999 on a 48-count federal racketeering indictment, which included 3 counts of first-degree felony murder in the Starbucks shootings. He was also accused in the shooting homicide of a security guard in 1993, the attempted murder of a police officer, and 4 armed robberies. using masks and stealing cars, so this justified the racketeering charge. U.S. Attorney Wilma A. Lewis said that he could seek the death penalty against Cooper, although he had not yet made that decision, and he would actually ultimately recommend a life sentence. Kirsch stated his intent to vigorously contest the indictments, and Cooper would then claim that he had been coerced into confessing. Cooper was quoted saying, "I swear on my father's grave and my son's life, I didn't do Starbucks." Both sides were now in a tug-of-war over the confession. While it nicely fits the facts, the interrogation had lasted many hours and technically could be viewed as coercive. So these cops who were certain they had closed the case had to sweat it out a while longer. Cooper pled not guilty to all of the charges, and he said that under extreme pressure he had lied about his role in the Starbucks slayings. The police had falsely said that they had lifted his fingerprints from the coffee shop, so he felt trapped. He then told the Prince George's County detectives what they wanted to hear. Thus, said his attorney, that Cooper's constitutional rights had been violated and his confession should not be admitted into any courtroom proceedings. 3 different detectives testified at a hearing that Cooper had not been coerced. He had voluntarily given his statement. He was offered food, allowed to rest during his 54-hour interrogation, and had been treated fairly. They claimed that he had waived his right to an attorney and there had been no question based on his intelligence level as to whether he had been competent to understand his rights. The detectives insisted that they had advised Cooper repeatedly throughout the 4-day marathon session that he could remain silent or have an attorney present. At all times he had been focused and comfortable, with no overt signs of anxiety. He had even signed 7 statements agreeing to waive his rights in talk, and the descriptions of his crimes were largely in his own handwriting. 3 of the statements were about the Starbucks killings. The police, nonetheless, were concerned by this Cooper's repudiation of his confession. Without the confession, they had little to tie Cooper to the murders. They had not been able to recover either weapon in the murders and had no fingerprints or trace evidence that would definitively put Cooper at the scene of the crime on the fatal night. While Cooper's description accurately matched the crime scene and wound patterns, and several of his associates would say he had talked about the incident, that was all still largely circumstantial. Public defender Francis D. Carter joined Kirsch to prepare for the trial. They argued that questioning should have stopped after the initial FBI interrogation when Cooper had stated, quote, "Killing is not my style," and had denied any involvement in the shootings. A public defender had even insisted at that time that the questioning should stop, and yet later that day Cooper began making statements investigation. So at this point, it was up to a judge to decide. On February 1st of 2000, Senior U.S. District Judge Joyce Hens Green ruled that the prosecutors could use Cooper's statements to the police as evidence in his trial. She stated, "The record shows that Cooper had an easy, comfortable, familiar, confident attitude toward his interrogators. Both on the facts and the law, there is no evidence to show Cooper's statements were anything but voluntary. Instead, they were clearly voluntary, readily and eagerly initiated, and provided free of coercion and duress." End quote. By February 15th, prosecutors announced that they would seek the death penalty under federal rather than D.C. statutes. Attorney General Janet Reno made the controversial decision, which sparked a great deal of criticism. However, there had been some developments. Investigators had evidence from the wiretaps that Cooper had threatened to kill 5 people he viewed as potential witnesses against him, as well as 2 investigators on the case and their families. In addition, he was a suspect in even more armed robberies, and his lengthy record of violent crimes, coupled with his lack of remorse, indicated that he could not be rehabilitated. He was a danger to society, and perhaps even in prison. Had this moved forward as a capital case, it would have been the first one for the District of Columbia in 30 years. The last execution had occurred there in 1957, but before it came to that, Cooper's attorneys examined the evidence and learned how many of Cooper's former associates had agreed to testify against him. One of them would describe precisely how Cooper had planned the Starbucks episode. Cooper was persuaded to accept a deal that spared his life and protected his wife and mother from prosecution as accomplices. On April 25th of 2000, a week before his trial was to begin, Cooper came to court to plead guilty to the 47 counts against him, including the Starbucks murders. As he admitted to each charge, one after the other, he wept, but he never expressed remorse to the relatives of the victims who packed the courtroom. He received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors also agreed not to pursue charges against his wife or mother, both of whom had assisted him in some manner. So, that will conclude the case